I remember I was working at Decipher. This is a game company making the Star Trek role-playing game and a Lord of the Rings role-playing game. We were having an office meeting where we were trying to figure out, we were going to go to Gen Con, and we were trying to figure out what kind of stuff we could use as kind of promotional tchotchkes we could give away at Gen Con that would be fun. And one of the folks in the room had the idea of making pins. Pins are, pretty cheap, and we could do Star Trek pins with like Klingon symbols on them or Federation symbols on them. And that would be a cheap and fun way to help kind of promote the product. And our office manager in the middle of this discussion interrupted everybody and said, I'm sorry, when y'all say pins, do you mean pins like you write with, or like pins like you wear on your lapel? And we all sat there and went, blink, blink. And after a few moments discussion, I asked her, I said, so can you not hear the difference between pin and pen? And she went, no, you just said the same thing twice. I think she thought that this is an elaborate troll on our part. And we kind of felt the same way. There was definitely a misalignment of communication. It took a few moments to work it out, but it was kind of dumbfounding me. I'd never encountered something like that before. But you can go look this up on the Wikipedia. There's a link in the doobly-doo where it's the pen shift, or whatever they call it. And it's about how there are words, and there are other things in life like sensitivity to temperature. There are things in life that you think of as being innate and built in, but actually are learned. A friend of mine whose parents are from Serbia, and he speaks a little Serbian, and when I told him the story, he said, like, for instance, he said in Serbian, these are two different words. And then he said the same thing to me twice. And I'm like, that's literally, and he goes, nope, those are two different sounds, but you were not raised to tell the difference between those two sounds. So from your point of view, they are the same. The canonical version of this is the word Shibboleth, which is an old Hebrew word used about 3,000 years ago as a passphrase, because one tribe could tell the difference between Shibboleth and Sibboleth, and the other tribe could not. And so the first tribe used it as a test to see, because in all other ways, these two tribes shared a culture and dress and everything else. But the one difference that you couldn't fake was whether or not you could pronounce this word. Whether or not you could hear the difference between the correct pronunciation of Shibboleth and the wrong pronunciation. The meaning of the word Shibboleth actually isn't important, only the act of saying it. I'm going to say that again because it's sort of the point of the video. The word Shibboleth had a meaning, but that didn't matter. Only your ability to say it. It could have meant anything. It could have meant cow or house, or that feeling when you're driving to work in the morning and it feels like you have the whole day ahead of you and things are going your way, and then your check engine light goes on and smoke starts to come out of your car and you realize you're about to have a very different day than the one you thought you were going to have. The meaning of the word wasn't important, only the saying of it. I noticed this when I was a nerd in the 80s as a teenager, and this was a time when being a nerd was not okay. You should expect, if you were a teenage nerd in, let's say, junior high school, to suffer some degree of physical abuse, aka bullying. That was real. It happened all the time. And so if you learned to pass as not a nerd, somebody who didn't read comic books and didn't talk to your friends about Wolverine and Cyclops. As a kid, finding different enclaves of nerds that we could hang out with and play games with, something I noticed was the overwhelming, almost uncontrollable pattern of all of these nerds all quoting The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Monty Python to each other. Only and always those two things. And I remember being somewhat frustrated because I quite liked those things. I'm a huge fan of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. When I was like 15, I recorded my own audiobook of it, doing all the different voices and stuff like that. I loved Monty Python. I loved The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But I remember thinking, guys, read another book, watch another TV show. But as I got older, I started to understand what was happening. These quotes were ways for us to communicate to each other that we belong to the same tribe. It is a way to reaffirm our connection to each other. They were shibboleths. The actual meaning of the phrases wasn't important, only the saying of them. We were telling each other, we belong. I belong. You belong. We are here together. This is our space. This is our tribe. Now, being online on social media, I see the same things happening just with different references. If, for instance, to pick an example completely random, if you tweet about George R.R. Martin, it doesn't really matter what you're tweeting about. It doesn't matter what idea you had or what he said recently that made you think about him and want to tweet about him. You can guarantee that a meaningful majority of the responses you're going to get will be talking about when the next Game of Thrones book is going to come out and whether or not George R. R. Martin is going to die before he writes it. And I would say an overwhelming cynicism regarding these two things. And it can seem frustrating because that's probably not what you wanted to talk about. You had some other point you wanted to make or some other thing that happened that you thought was interesting. But in the comments, all anyone wants to say are, when is the next book coming out? Is the next book coming out? Will he finish it or will he die first? And I think the issue there isn't that those people want to have a conversation about that. They're not, if you notice in the comments, they're not talking to each other about that. There's no discourse happening. There's no exchange of ideas. They're just saying the thing they know you say when someone brings up George R. R. Martin. They're saying the things they know will get them approval and acceptance in the group. They're saying, I belong to this group. I know the passphrases. I know the things you say when the subject comes up. I will prove it. They say the thing that they know you say when the subject comes up, and thereby they prove that they belong to this group. The lesson, I think, if there is one, is that when you see all of these comments on social media and they all seem the same, just all these people parroting the same phrases or ideas over and over again, and no one's talking to each other and there's no discourse, it's easy to be cynical about that and get depressed. But in fact, I don't think those people are talking about the subject, the meaning of their words. They're just trying to say, I belong. This is a space in which I am a member. This is my tribe. I know the things you say when these subjects come up, which is a perfectly natural human thing to do. And maybe we don't need to be as cynical as it seems like we are when we're reading all these comments online. Anyway, that's just something I thought would make a fun video, and why not? It's Friday night. I hope you folks have a great weekend.